In the summer of 1863, 23 formerly enslaved people finally reached freedom in Brooklyn, New York. 2 nights after they arrived, German volunteers served them a simple meal, freshly cooked hamburgers. When they took their first bites, every one of them, men, women, and even children, began crying uncontrollably. Not from pain, not from fear, but from something deeper, the shock of tasting food made with care, of being served as human beings, for the first time in their lives. Within 48 hours, one of them vanished. By Halloween, all 23 were gone. No bodies, no clues, no answers. The police refused to investigate. The camp's records were changed. And the truth, about what really happened to those people who cried over hamburgers, was buried under lies, greed, and fear. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you're drawn to stories hidden beneath American history, the ones textbooks ignore, then hit that subscribe button, tap the bell icon, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? Now, let's go back to the summer of 1863. When freedom was fragile, and kindness came with a price. Part 1. The meal that made them weep. The summer of 1863 was boiling New York alive. After the draft riots in July, when mobs had hunted and murdered dozens of black citizens, the city carried a tension you could taste in the air. Across the river, in Brooklyn, things were quieter. But not peaceful. Fear and resentment ran through every street like sparks waiting for dry wood. Near the shore of Wallabout Bay, where thousands of Revolutionary War prisoners had once died on British ships, the Brooklyn Abolition Society ran a small refugee camp. It wasn't much. An old rope factory turned into barracks, with bunk beds, shared cooking fires, and a few volunteers trying to teach reading and writing. The camp's benefactor, Harold Grayson, was a wealthy merchant. He'd lost his son at Antietam and poured his grief into helping others escape slavery. By August, about 140 freed people lived there, most from the South, all trying to start new lives. The Georgia 23. On August 27, 1863, a new group arrived, 23 men, women, and children who had traveled together all the way from Georgia. They were different from others. Most refugees came in small families or alone. But this group moved like a single body, quiet, careful, and united. Their leader was a tall woman named Patience. She was around 35, strong, sharp-eyed, her gray-streaked hair tied with a faded red cloth. When Grayson asked for their names, she gave little detail. They had escaped from Pritchard's Landing, a rice plantation north of Savannah. The journey had taken 7 months. 31 had started it. Only 23 survived. They spoke a coastal dialect, Gullah, full of rhythm and whispers from the lowcountry. And the children were strange. Silent, watching. 6 in total, 3 boys, 3 girls. The youngest, a baby named Hope. The butcher and the burgers. Among the camp's volunteers was Friedrich Vogel, a young German butcher who worked in his uncle's shop during the day. He was kind, quiet, and always smelled faintly of smoke and salt. In the evenings, he helped cook for the camp. 2 nights after the Georgia group arrived, Friedrich wanted to make something special, hamburgers. Back then, they weren't fancy. Just ground beef with onions and pepper, fried on an iron griddle, and served on soft rolls. But for the refugees, who were used to plain stew and hard bread, this was a feast. As Friedrich worked the grinder, the smell of sizzling beef drifted through the camp. People stepped out of their barracks, drawn by the smoke. Volunteers set up long wooden tables under the evening sky. The light from the setting sun turned the Manhattan skyline into gold. For once, there was laughter. Tears at the table. Patience's group waited until everyone else had been served. Then they stepped forward, silent and trembling, accepting their plates. Anna Muller, one of the German volunteers, whispered to Friedrich. "They look like they're afraid it will disappear." The 23 sat together near the eastern barracks. For a long moment, none of them ate. They just stared at the food. Then Patience lifted her hamburger, smelled it, and took a small bite. Her eyes widened. Her face changed, and then, she started to cry. Deep, unstoppable sobs. The others followed, one by one. A man named Solomon wept into his beard. A woman named Esther pressed her hands to her face. A young boy, Benjamin, wailed like he was both happy and broken at once. Even the baby, Hope, started crying as her mother, Naomi, rocked her and wept. No one could explain it. They were crying and eating at the same time, as if every bite unlocked years of buried pain. The volunteers froze. Some cried with them. Friedrich understood. He'd fled oppression himself. He knew what it meant to taste dignity for the first time. When Patience finished, she walked up to him, still shaking. She took his hands and said softly, "We never knew food could taste like this. Like we were people who deserved it." Friedrich couldn't speak. He just nodded. That night, as the camp quieted down, the Georgia group stayed together by the fire, whispering in their strange lowcountry tongue. Harold Grayson wrote in his evening log. The Georgia arrivals showed remarkable emotion at supper. They are bonded, protective. There is something powerful in them, something I cannot name. The man in the shadows. What Grayson didn't see was the stranger standing beyond the light. A white man in a dark coat, half hidden among the trees. He'd been watching the entire meal, eyes fixed on Patience and her group. When the lamps dimmed, he turned and walked toward the docks. 2 more men were waiting. They spoke briefly, then vanished into the night. The first disappearance. 2 days later, Ruth, a 7-year-old girl from the Georgia group, went missing. It was a humid August morning. Ruth was helping hang laundry, singing soft tunes with Anna Muller. Anna left for less than 3 minutes to fetch more clothespins. When she came back, Ruth was gone. Her plate from that dinner still sat by her bunk, untouched. And that was only the beginning. To be continued, Part 2, The Vanishing begins. Loudspeaker call to action. If this story chills you, there's more coming. This is just part 1 of a 10-part true horror series based on hidden corners of American history. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and tell me in the comments. Right finger, where are you watching from? Right finger, do you believe those 23 people really disappeared, or were they taken? Title: The Vanishing Begins, The Brooklyn Refugee Mystery Part 2. A 7-year-old girl vanished in broad daylight. Dozens of people were nearby. No one saw a thing. It happened just 2 days after that unforgettable meal. The night 23 refugees from Georgia cried over hamburgers. At first, everyone thought maybe she wandered off. But when the second person vanished, and then a third, it became clear. Something was hunting them. If you believe history hides darker truths than any ghost story, then hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's return to the Brooklyn refugee camp of 1863. Where freedom was supposed to be safe, but wasn't. Part 2. The Vanishing begins. Morning sunlight glimmered across the laundry lines when Anna Muller noticed something wrong. A little girl named Ruth, just 7 years old, had vanished. Anna had left the washing area for less than 3 minutes to fetch more clothespins. When she came back, Ruth was gone. No scream, no struggle, no witnesses. The camp came alive with panic. Harold Grayson, the man who ran the camp, organized a search within the hour. Volunteers and refugees scoured the barracks, checked the shoreline, and even searched the muddy woods beyond the fence. They shouted Ruth's name until their voices broke. Nothing. No footprints. No sign of clothing. It was as if the little girl had dissolved into the air. When someone told Patience, the leader of the Georgia group, she didn't scream or cry. She just froze. Her face turned to stone. Then she asked one question. Did anyone see a white man watching? Grayson frowned. No, he said. We have guards on duty. No one unauthorized comes in or out. Patience nodded slowly, her eyes distant. She said nothing else, just turned and walked back to her group. That evening, her people spoke in hushed gullah whispers. Whatever she told them made their faces go pale. They knew something the others didn't. No help from the law. Friedrich Vogel, the young German butcher who had cooked the hamburgers, went straight to the police. He returned 2 hours later, shaking with anger. The desk sergeant laughed. He said she probably ran off. Called her a contraband girl. Said they don't waste men on runaways. The police wouldn't even write a report. So the camp took matters into their own hands. Volunteers kept watch through the nights. They lit lamps, walked patrols, and checked every shadow. But after 3 sleepless nights, even fear gets tired. The camp returned to normal rhythms, or tried to. Everyone except Patience's group. They moved differently now, always together. No one left alone, not even for a moment. The second vanishing. On September 4th, another name was added to the nightmare. Caleb, one of the older men from Georgia, disappeared in broad daylight. He'd been unloading supply wagons, taking short breaks because of an old leg injury. During one of those breaks, he walked toward the trees to relieve himself. He never came back. Friedrich followed his footprints into the grass, and found nothing. No drag marks, no struggle, no clue. This time, Grayson didn't even bother with the police. He sent volunteers into the city, to the docks, to taverns, to the markets, asking if anyone had seen a limping black man. No one had. It was as if Caleb had stepped off the earth. By mid-September, the camp's hope turned to dread. Refugees started avoiding Patience's people, whispering that they were cursed. Others said it wasn't ghosts, it was bounty hunters, slave catchers. But how could they snatch people so cleanly, in a crowded camp, without anyone seeing? Fear in the barracks. Patience looked older every day. Her face had grown hollow. Her group had stopped eating with the others. Volunteers brought food to their barracks, but no one spoke much anymore. The children clung to the adults constantly. Even the baby, Hope, had stopped smiling. Thomas Rutherford, a free black volunteer, decided he couldn't stand by. He had contacts all over Brooklyn, church leaders, dock workers, and laborers who knew how to keep their ears open. He began asking quiet questions. Had anyone seen strange white men near the camp? Had bounty hunters been operating nearby? The answers were always the same. Yes, there were bounty hunters. There always were. And yes, people had vanished before, snatched right off Brooklyn's streets. But no one could name who was doing it. The third disappearance. On September 21st, nearly a month after the refugees arrived, tragedy struck again. Naomi, the young mother of baby Hope, vanished during the night. At dawn, they found the baby still sleeping in Naomi's bunk. Wrapped neatly in a blanket, as if her mother had tucked her in just before vanishing. Patience didn't speak for hours. When she finally did, her voice cracked. She wouldn't have left her child. Not ever. That morning, Patience gathered what was left of her people. 11 adults. 2 children. She told Grayson they were leaving. He begged her to stay. You'll be safer here than out there, he insisted. Patience looked at him with weary eyes. Sir, she said quietly, we ain't safe nowhere. But out there, at least we can see them coming. The man from the docks. That same evening, Thomas got word from Abraham Fletcher, a black stevedore who worked the ferry docks. Fletcher said, I heard you're asking questions about disappearances. I got something to tell you, but it's dangerous. They met in Fletcher's small rented room above a warehouse near the waterfront. The air smelled of salt, smoke, and whiskey. Fletcher poured 2 cups and leaned in. For weeks now, he said, 3 white men been watching the docks. Dressed fine, boots clean. They act polite, but they ain't right. They watch who comes and goes, mostly us. Black folks. And they write things down. Like merchants keeping inventory. Thomas felt a chill. You've seen them take people. Fletcher nodded slowly. 3 times. They walk up calm, show some papers, legal looking, with seals. Claim someone's a fugitive, got a right to take him back. Folks don't argue. They just go. He took a shaky breath. I seen them load people into a covered wagon on South Street. Then they head toward the ferry. After that, I don't know where they go. But none of them folks ever come back. Thomas's stomach turned. You know who they work for? Fletcher hesitated. Word is, there's a man in Manhattan, runs a boarding house near 5 Points. Name's Virgil Dutton. He's got southern connections. Helps bounty hunters process runaways before sending them back. The truth begins to surface. Thomas went straight to Harold Grayson's home that night and told him everything. Grayson listened in horror. This is a kidnapping ring, he said finally. They're using the Fugitive Slave Act as cover. He promised to go above the police, to contact federal authorities and the army still stationed in New York after the riots. But before he could act, something unexpected happened. The next morning, Patience requested a private meeting. Inside the small office of the old rope factory, she sat across from Grayson, her face drawn but determined. "I need to tell you the truth," she said. "About who we are. About why they're taking us." Grayson leaned forward. "I'm listening." Patience took a breath. "When I said we came from Pritchard's Landing, that was true. But I didn't tell you everything." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Pritchard's Landing wasn't just a rice plantation, Mr. Grayson. It was a breeding farm." To be continued, Part 3, The Breeding Farm Secret. Loudspeaker call to action. If this story has you chilled, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and tell me in the comments. Right finger, do you think these people were taken by men, or something darker? Stay tuned for Part 3, The Breeding Farm Secret. Part 3, The Papers from the Master's Office. Sometimes, evil doesn't die when the master falls. Sometimes, it changes its clothes, and signs its name in ink instead of blood. The moment Patience spoke, her voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury that had burned too long. "The law don't protect people who look like me, Mr. Grayson," she said sharply. "You know that. But what we found before leaving Pritchard's plantation, it's worse than just men with whips and chains." Grayson's chest tightened. He could see the pain behind her steady eyes that had seen too much. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a whisper. "We found papers in the master's office. Couldn't read most of it, but Solomon could, just enough to understand. There were names, northern names, businessmen, investors. They were funding Pritchard's breeding operation." Grayson froze. The words hit him like cold iron. "You mean to tell me," he said slowly, "that northern men from New York, were invested in slavery?" Patience nodded. "Invested in us. By name, by age, by value. One name looked like Gray, or Grav something. From Brooklyn." Her voice cracked slightly on that last word. "At first, we thought it was a mistake. But then we came here, to your camp, and you were kind. You gave us food, shelter. We wanted to believe you were one of the good ones. Then Ruth disappeared. Then Caleb. Then the others. And I started thinking." She took a shaky breath. "What if it wasn't luck that brought us here? What if someone guided us? What if this camp isn't a refuge, but a trap?" Grayson wanted to protest, but the words wouldn't come. He'd always believed his camp was a sanctuary for escaped souls. But Patience's group, they were the only ones being taken. One by one, cleanly, quietly, without a trace. "Who else knew about those papers?" he asked, his voice tight. "The overseer, Samuel Cogburn," Patience replied. "He handled the business side of things. Contracts, sales. If he knew, others did too. Maybe he told them where we'd run. Maybe they've been tracking us ever since." Grayson rubbed his temples. "If what you're saying is true, someone here has access to camp records, knows where people sleep when they're alone. That means it could be anyone. A volunteer, or even, or you," Patience finished flatly. "That's why I'm taking a risk telling you this. I don't think you're involved. But I can't be sure. Either you're the man you pretend to be, or you're the reason my people are vanishing." Before Grayson could answer, a sharp knock interrupted them. Friedrich, one of his aides, appeared at the door, pale and nervous. "Mr. Grayson," he said, "there's a man here to see you. Says he's from the Freedmen's Bureau. Wants to talk about camp registration." Grayson frowned. "The Freedmen's Bureau," he muttered. "That doesn't exist yet." Patience's face drained of color. "That's one of them," she hissed. "I'd bet everything I own. Mr. Grayson, if you really are who you say you are, you need to act now. They'll come tonight. I can feel it." Then she was gone, leaving him with a silence heavier than any chain. Grayson sat for a long time after she left, staring at the flickering lantern on his desk. Could it be true? Could his own camp, the refuge he'd built with his fortune and conscience, be part of something monstrous? He'd made his money in shipping, honest trade. But many of his peers had darker dealings, ships that carried cargo no one spoke of. Could one of them have used his operation for their own ends? He told himself no, but deep down, something cold whispered maybe. He rose, straightened his coat, and stepped outside. The man waiting in the yard was ordinary, middle-aged, thinning hair, wearing a dark, dusty suit. Charles Wexler, he said pleasantly. Assistant to the regional coordinator for refugee affairs. Just need to verify camp records, routine procedure. His papers looked official, but Grayson's trained eye saw it. The ink, the seals, too new, too perfect. A skilled forgery. Still, he smiled. Of course, Mr. Wexler. Anything for the government. Inside, though, his blood ran cold. This was how they were doing it, getting access to names, locations, schedules. That's how they picked them off. While Wexler pretended to work, Grayson quietly pulled his aide Thomas aside. Listen carefully, he whispered. Go to Manhattan. Find a real federal marshal, not local police. Bring troops if you must. Tell them there's a kidnapping operation happening right now. Lives are in danger. Thomas didn't hesitate. He caught the next ferry out. But even as he left, the night began to curdle. Because Charles Wexler hadn't come alone. 2 other men lingered near the edge of camp, pretending to be guards, waiting for twilight. As the camp gathered for supper, laughter and clinking dishes masked their quiet movements. They drifted toward the barracks, the one housing Patience and the last of her people. One of them knocked softly on the doorframe. Got a letter here, he called in a friendly tone. For someone named Patience Crane. Came from Georgia. Says it's urgent family. Title: The Hollowcrest Scandal, Part 4, The Letter from Georgia. Historic horror series, written in the style of 19th century America with simple, gripping narration. The night at Wallabout Bay was unusually still, as if the world itself held its breath. Every flicker of lantern light cast long, trembling shadows across the camp. Somewhere in those shadows, evil waited, quiet, patient, wearing a human face. Patience stood frozen before the half-open barracks door, her breath shallow. The stranger's silhouette shifted slightly, and in the dim light, she could make out the pale glint of paper between his fingers. You said it's about Ruth? She asked, voice trembling. Yes, ma'am, the man replied softly. Says she's alive. She's waiting for you in the city. The other refugees huddled behind her, whispering anxiously. Solomon, the old man with the scar across his temple, shook his head in warning. Don't you open that door, Patience. That ain't no friend of yours. But Patience's heart battled her reason. The thought of Ruth, her laughter, her faith, her sudden disappearance, haunted her dreams every night. If there was a chance Ruth was still alive, she had to know. Slide it under, Patience said. The man hesitated, then crouched, pushing the envelope under the door. It was yellowed and stained with dirt, addressed in shaky handwriting, Patience Crane, Wallabout Bay Refugee Camp. She bent to pick it up, her hands trembling as she unfolded the letter. The words inside were scrawled in charcoal, almost unreadable, but the first line was clear. Patience, they got me, but I'm alive. They said I can go free if you come. Don't tell no one. Come alone. Her heart pounded. It's Ruth's handwriting, she whispered. Solomon's face darkened. Or somebody making sure you think it is. Before she could respond, the man outside spoke again, this time his tone sharper, less patient. We don't have much time, miss. They said she's waitin' now. I can take you there. Patience backed away, suddenly uneasy. The voice no longer carried that gentle drawl, it was cold, calculated. Who sent you? She asked. The man chuckled under his breath. You'll see soon enough. That was enough for Solomon. He lunged forward, slamming the door shut and throwing the iron latch across. Ain't no letter worth dyin' for, he hissed. Outside, the man's tone turned vicious. You think you can hide? You think the bureau don't know who's here? He pounded once on the door, then the sound of his boots faded into the night. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind rattling through the gaps in the wooden walls. Patience sank to her knees, still holding the letter. If they know we're here, Solomon, what do we do? We wait, Solomon said grimly. We wait for Grayson. Meanwhile, in the main office, Grayson was playing a dangerous game. The false bureau agent, Charles Wexler, sat across from him, carefully copying names from the camp registry into his notebook. "You've done fine work here," Wexler said smoothly. "It's important, what you're doing, helping these poor souls find their place in freedom." Grayson nodded, though every instinct screamed that the man was lying. He had noticed the way Wexler's eyes lingered too long on the names from Pritchard's Landing, the ones patients had warned him about. "You mentioned these forms are new federal regulations," Grayson said casually. "Could I see your authorizing letter?" Wexler smiled thinly. "Classified order, sir. Straight from Washington." Grayson leaned back in his chair, studying him. "Strange," he said quietly. "I was in Washington just 2 months ago. No mention of this bureau then." For a moment, the air between them froze. Then Wexler chuckled, forcing a smile. "Ah, you know how it is with the government, paperwork faster than word of mouth." But his fingers twitched. Grayson knew he was bluffing. He also knew time was running out. Thomas had gone for help, but Manhattan was hours away, and if Patience was right, the attack would come tonight. He needed proof, something to hold Wexler long enough for help to arrive. "Mr. Wexler," he said finally, rising from his chair. "You must be hungry. Let me fetch some supper from the kitchen." The man waved him off. "No need. I'll finish these names first." "Of course," Grayson said, stepping outside. But instead of heading to the kitchen, he hurried toward the storage shed where lanterns and tools were kept. There, he found Friedrich, the nervous young volunteer who'd brought Wexler in earlier. "Friedrich," Grayson said sharply. "That man, did you check his papers yourself?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir." He showed them quick, seemed official. "Find the guards," Grayson ordered. "Tell them no one leaves or enters this camp without my word." "Yes, sir." Grayson turned toward the barracks. He needed to warn Patience. Inside the barracks, the tension was unbearable. The refugees had pushed furniture against the door and doused the lamps. Children huddled silently under blankets, their small faces pale in the darkness. Solomon sat near the door, musket across his knees. "They'll come back," he whispered. "Ain't no doubt." Patience nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." But ready for what? These were not soldiers. They were men and women who had already survived hell. They had no weapons, no training, only courage and desperation. The minutes dragged on. Outside, the camp noises quieted one by one until only the distant crash of waves filled the silence. Then came the sound, soft footsteps on the gravel. Solomon motioned for silence. He crept to the window, peering through a crack. 2 men stood near the fence, moving carefully toward the barracks. One carried a lantern, its light glinting off something metallic, a chain. Patience's heart stopped. "They're here," Solomon whispered. Before he could raise his musket, a third man appeared behind them, holding a pistol. He wasn't aiming at the barracks, he was aiming at Solomon. The shot rang out, shattering the stillness. Solomon fell back, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Screams, children crying, wood splintering as the men outside charged the door. Patience grabbed the fallen musket and fired blindly into the night. One of the attackers stumbled, cursing. But there were more, too many. Then, through the smoke and panic, Grayson appeared, pistol drawn. "Back away," he shouted, firing a warning shot into the air. For a moment, the attackers hesitated. Then the one with the lantern dropped it, flames spilling. Across the ground, fire raced up the barracks wall as the men fled into the darkness. Grayson kicked the door open, pulling Patience and the others out into the night. "Get to the main hall," he shouted. "Now." The camp erupted into confusion as volunteers rushed to contain the fire. In the chaos, Wexler vanished. His forged papers lay abandoned on Grayson's desk, alongside a torn envelope bearing the words Gray and Company, Brooklyn. Grayson stared at the name, his blood running cold. Patience saw it too. "I told you," she whispered. "They knew us by name." Grayson clenched his jaw. "Then tonight," he said, "we stop being prey." Behind them, the barracks burned, flames licking the sky like a beacon, a warning and a promise of reckoning to come. To be continued in Part 5. the Night of Fire. Call to action. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for part 5 of the Hollowcrest Scandal. Leave a comment below. Do you think Grayson is truly innocent, or is he part of something darker? Title: The Hollowcrest Scandal, Part 5, The Night of Fire. Historic horror series, written in simple, gripping 19th-century American style for YouTube audience. The flames at Wallabout Bay weren't just burning wood, they were burning secrets. As the night sky glowed red, the line between friend and enemy vanished in the smoke. Something ancient and merciless had come to collect its due. The fire spread fast, licking through the dry pine boards of the barracks. Screams echoed as refugees rushed into the cold night air, clutching children, dragging trunks, calling out for the missing. Grayson shouted orders, his voice hoarse from smoke. Water lines, bucket chains. Keep the fire from reaching the kitchens. Volunteers scrambled, passing pails from the river. Sparks flew overhead like falling stars. But amid the chaos, Grayson's eyes never stopped searching for one man, Charles Wexler, the imposter from the so-called Freedmen's Bureau. He was gone, vanished the moment the fire started. Grayson's gut twisted. The blaze wasn't an accident. It was a distraction, a cover for something worse. He turned to Patience, who stood beside the wounded Solomon. "We need to get everyone to the chapel," he said. "It's the only building made of stone." Patience nodded, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Solomon can't walk. His shoulder's bad." Grayson grabbed the old man under the arm. "Then we carry him." Inside the stone chapel, the air was thick with fear. Nearly 40 people had gathered, men, women, children, all watching the orange light flicker through the cracks in the wooden doors. The smell of smoke mixed with something else, iron, damp earth, and a strange sweet rot that made Grayson's skin crawl. Patience noticed it too. "Do you smell that?" Grayson nodded grimly. "Like something dead." Suddenly, the heavy doors creaked. Friedrich stumbled in, face pale. "Mr. Grayson, I found them." "Found who?" "The men who started the fire. Down by the docks. They've got a wagon loaded with chains and crates, like they're taking people." His voice broke. They already got some." Grayson's blood ran cold. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. I tried to stop them, but..." A gunshot cracked through the night, cutting him off. Grayson ducked instinctively, pulling Friedrich down. The shot hadn't come from far away. Patience clutched the children close. "They're coming for the rest." "Not if I can help it," Grayson said, rising. He checked his pistol, 2 rounds left, and handed Friedrich a lantern. "Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone unless it's me or Thomas." But, no time to argue. He stepped out into the smoky night. The camp was chaos. Smoke rolled through the yard like ghostly fog. Figures ran between tents, some real, some only shadows. Grayson moved carefully, crouched low. The docks were barely visible through the haze, but he could make out movement near the water. 3 men. One was Wexler. The others were loading bound refugees onto a wagon, 2 women, a man, and a child. The sight turned Grayson's stomach. These weren't slavers from the south, they were well-dressed, northern men with fine boots and clean coats. Businessmen. Investors. Wexler looked up and saw him. His smile was cold. "Ah, Mr. Grayson, I was hoping you'd see this. Saves me explaining later." Grayson raised his pistol. "Let them go." Wexler didn't flinch. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. These people aren't just runaways. They're property, collateral, names on paper worth more than your entire camp." Grayson's hand trembled. "You're talking about human beings." "I'm talking about contracts," Wexler said. "Signed in good faith between men of industry, north and south. Men like you, Mr. Grayson." Grayson's pulse spiked. "I've never bought a life in my..." Wexler laughed. "Oh, you didn't have to. Your ships carried them. Your warehouses stored the cotton they picked. You profited just the same." For a moment, the words struck deep. He had built his fortune on southern goods. He had told himself it was just trade, not sin. But hearing it spoken aloud made him feel unclean. "Let them go," he said again. Wexler sighed. "I can't. Too much money tied up in this shipment." Then he whistled sharply. 2 more men stepped from the shadows, rifles raised. Grayson fired first. His bullet caught one man in the shoulder. The others fired back, splinters exploding around him as he dove behind a crate. The fight was quick and brutal. Grayson's second shot dropped the other gunman, but a burning pain tore through his leg. He hit the ground hard. Wexler walked toward him, pistol drawn. "You should have stayed out of this, Grayson. Now you'll burn with the rest." He aimed. Then, a scream. It came from the trees beyond the docks. High, wild, inhuman. Everyone froze. Out of the darkness stumbled one of Wexler's own men, eyes wide with terror. "Something's in the woods," he shouted. "It ain't no man." Before he could finish, he was yanked backward into the fog. The sound that followed was wet and final. Wexler's face went pale. What was that?" Grayson, bleeding and gasping, managed a grim smile. "You brought this evil here, now it's come for you." The fog thickened. Shapes moved within it, tall, thin, silent. The air grew colder, heavy with the stench of decay. Patience's words echoed in his mind. "The dead don't rest easy where injustice walks free." A shadow brushed past Wexler. He spun and fired wildly, but the bullet only hit smoke. Then a hand, gray, bone-thin, wrapped around his throat. His scream was swallowed by the mist. When the fog cleared, the docks were empty. No Wexler, no wagon, only the whisper of waves and the faint metallic clink of chains sinking beneath the water. Grayson staggered back toward the chapel, blood trailing behind him. His vision blurred, but the sight that met him brought strength to his limbs. Thomas had returned, with soldiers. Blue-coated Union men armed with rifles fanned out across the camp, rounding up the remaining strangers. Patience ran to Grayson, supporting him as he stumbled. "You're hurt." "Not bad," he said, wincing. "Where's Solomon?" "Alive. The fire's out." She looked toward the docks. "Where's Wexler?" Grayson hesitated. "Gone, along with the devils he served." Patience stared into the darkness. "Good." But in her eyes, there was no relief, only sorrow. By dawn, the fire was nothing but smoldering ash. The soldiers carted away the surviving conspirators. Their faces pale and shaken. No one could explain what had happened near the water. Grayson stood at the edge of the dock, staring down at the blackened planks. Beneath the surface, something glinted faintly, like a broken chain swaying in the current. Patience joined him quietly. "Do you think they're gone?" Grayson shook his head. "Evil like that never dies. It just waits for the next man greedy enough to listen." She nodded slowly. "Then we tell the truth. About the papers. About the names. All of it." He turned to her. "If we do, it'll put powerful men in danger." "Good," she said. "Maybe it's time they knew what danger feels like." The sun rose over Wallabout Bay, lighting the smoke-scarred camp. The survivors watched in silence, haunted but unbroken. And far below the surface of the bay, something moved, chains shifting softly, as if restless for the next soul who dared disturb their sleep. To be continued in Part 6, The Curse Beneath the Bay. Call to action. If this story gripped you, like, share, and subscribe for Part 6 of the Hollowcrest Scandal. Comment your theory. Was it vengeance, or something far darker beneath Wallabout Bay? Title: The Hollowcrest Scandal, Part 6, The Curse Beneath the Bay. Historic horror series, written for American YouTube audience, 1,000 words, simple and cinematic language. When dawn broke over Wallabout Bay, the smoke cleared, but not the fear. Something still lingered beneath the calm water, ancient and watching. And as Patience soon learned, the fire hadn't ended their nightmare. It had only woken what slept below. The morning after the fire felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Ash floated on the air like gray snow. The camp smelled of wet smoke and saltwater. Soldiers from the Union Patrol were still combing through the ruins, searching for bodies, human or otherwise. They found none. No trace of Wexler or the men who'd come with him. Only boot prints ending at the edge of the dock. And something else. When a private reached into the shallow water to pull a piece of charred rope, he recoiled with a shout. His hand was cut open, deep and clean, as if by a blade. The rope wasn't rope at all, it was plaited human hair, burned black but unmistakable. Grayson watched silently as the soldiers muttered prayers. Patience stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around baby Hope. Her eyes never left the water. "It ain't over," she said softly. By midday, the camp was mostly cleared. The soldiers escorted surviving refugees to a nearby warehouse for shelter, leaving behind the charred remains of the old rope factory. Grayson limped through the debris with Thomas and Friedrich, searching for what could be saved. The wind coming off the bay felt colder than it should have in late September. Thomas stopped suddenly. "Mr. Grayson, you see that?" Near the burned chapel, the earth had cracked open, revealing something buried beneath. Grayson crouched down, brushing away ash and dirt. At first, he thought it was wood. But as the sunlight hit it, he realized it was a lid, part of an old coffin, or something like it, half buried in the soil. Friedrich swallowed hard. "Should we open it?" Grayson hesitated, but curiosity overrode fear. "Get a crowbar." When they pried it open, a wave of rot hit them like a blow. Inside lay no body, only rags and broken iron shackles. And on the lid's underside, words had been carved, rough, angry scratches made long ago. "Stolen souls return to the deep." Friedrich backed away, crossing himself. "We shouldn't touch this." Patience's voice came from behind them. "You shouldn't have touched anything." They turned. She was standing in the smoke, her eyes distant, her expression hollow. "This land was built on bodies," she said. "Long before this war, before you or me. The Bay remembers. It don't forgive." That night, the survivors slept in the warehouse. The soldiers posted guards at every door, though few believed they were guarding against men anymore. Grayson couldn't sleep. His wound throbbed, his mind spinning. Wexler had vanished, but the deeper horror was what he'd said, that northern men, respectable businessmen, had invested in southern stock. That meant there were records, contracts, ledgers, names. And if those men learned he knew, they'd come for him next. Just before dawn, he heard a sound, a faint splash, then another. He rose, grabbed his coat, and stepped outside. The tide was high, whispering against the dock. But something moved out there, shapes rising and sinking just beneath the surface. Then a figure broke through the water. It was Ruth, the little girl who'd vanished a month earlier. Her nightgown clung to her, dripping, her hair slick with brine. She stood perfectly still, eyes empty. "Ruth," Grayson whispered. "My God, child." She blinked slowly, then spoke in a voice too calm, too measured. "They're coming back." Grayson froze. "Who?" Her gaze drifted past him toward the camp. "All of them." Before he could move, Ruth stepped backward, and slipped silently beneath the water. No struggle, no sound, gone. By the time he returned to the warehouse, the others were awake. Thomas was already packing supplies. "We need to move these people inland," Thomas said. "This place ain't safe." Patience shook her head. "You can't run from what's in the ground. It follows blood." "What do you mean?" Grayson asked. Patience turned to him slowly. "You remember that breeding farm I told you about, Pritchard's Landing? There were stories, even back then, about a curse, about how the women who died birthing their children would haunt the bloodlines that sold them." She looked toward the bay. "Those men who took us, they weren't just slavers. They were part of the same blood that cursed us." Thomas frowned. "So what? You think ghosts are doing this?" Patience's eyes glimmered. "Not ghosts, Mr. Rutherford. Spirits of the drowned. They've been waiting centuries to drag their masters home." Later that day, 2 soldiers patrolling the shoreline vanished. Their rifles were found on the sand, barrels rusted as if they'd lain underwater for years. When night came, the fog rolled in again, thick, suffocating, alive. The horses panicked. The lamps dimmed though the oil was fresh. And from the bay came a sound no one could mistake: chains dragging across the stones, slow and steady. Thomas grabbed his rifle. "Get everyone inside." The soldiers took up defensive positions at the windows. Grayson stood beside them, heart pounding. Through the fog, figures appeared, dozens of them. They moved like people, but their outlines shimmered, distorted. Water dripped from their faces. Some still wore slave collars. Others had ropes around their necks. "The dead of Wallabout Bay." Friedrich whispered, "Lord have mercy." Patience stepped forward, clutching baby Hope tight. They're not here for mercy. They're here for justice. A cold wind burst through the broken windows, snuffing every candle at once. The room plunged into darkness. Then a voice spoke, from everywhere and nowhere. You built your heaven on our bones. The soldiers fired blindly into the fog, but the bullets made no sound when they hit. Only ripples, like stones thrown into deep water. Grayson grabbed Patience's arm. We have to get these people out of here. But she was staring at the bay, tears streaming down her face. There's no running. This land remembers. As the fog thickened, something began rising from the water, a massive shadow, taller than the trees, its surface rippling like liquid flesh. Chains dangled from its arms, clinking softly. It wasn't human. It wasn't even one thing. It was many, a fusion of every lost soul bound in iron. The soldiers broke ranks and fled. Grayson and Thomas dragged as many refugees as they could toward the woods. Behind them, the warehouse shuddered as if the ground itself was breathing. A low moan swept across the bay, a sound like mourning and rage entwined. When they reached the tree line, Grayson turned back. The water had begun to glow faintly blue, and for an instant, he saw faces, hundreds of them, beneath the surface, looking up. Then the light vanished. The bay fell silent again. By morning, the fog was gone. The warehouse was half collapsed, black with moisture. Of the soldiers, only one remained alive, muttering nonsense about iron hands, dragging men below. Patience stood by the water's edge, staring at her reflection. They'll come again, she said. Grayson nodded weakly. Then we find out why. She turned to him, her voice almost a whisper. You already know why. You just don't want to see it. And when she walked away, he saw his own reflection ripple, then split, two faces staring back. One his own, the other, pale and smiling, with eyes that belonged to Charles Wexler. To be continued in Part 7, The Blood Ledger. Call to action. If this story chilled your bones, hit like, share, and subscribe for Part 7 of the Hollowcrest Scandal. Comment below, do you think the curse is justice, or vengeance? Title: The Hollowcrest Scandal, Part 7, The Blood Ledger. Historic horror series, written in cinematic, simple language for American YouTube audience, 1,000 words. The curse had awakened, but it wasn't done. For every soul drowned in the bay, another would rise. And when Grayson opened the old ledger, he realized. It wasn't just a record of slavery. It was a map, of damnation. 3 nights after the Wallabout Bay horror, the survivors reached a remote farmhouse north of Brooklyn. The soldiers who'd lived through the fog refused to speak. One man had gone blind overnight, another wouldn't step near water. Grayson sat by the fire, his arms still wrapped in bloodied bandages. The burns were healing, but the pain had changed. It pulsed, like something alive beneath the skin. Thomas poured him a cup of bitter coffee. We can't stay here long. Wexler's men will be looking for us. Grayson shook his head. Wexler's not coming. Whatever was in that bay took him. Thomas sighed. Then it's done. Let it be. But Grayson wasn't listening. He held an old, leather-bound ledger in his hands, the one he'd found in the wreckage of the rope factory. It was half-burned, edges blackened, pages brittle as ash. And on the first surviving page, written in precise handwriting, were these words. Ledger of Holdings, Hollowcrest and Company. By order of Charles Wexler, 1824. Beneath that, columns of names, dates, and prices. But halfway down the list, the ink changed color, smeared in red, as though written in blood. Each name was followed by a note. Transferred, returned, claimed by the bay. Grayson's stomach turned. The last page bore a single line, scrawled in haste. The debt will be collected in flesh. Patience entered quietly, holding baby Hope. Her face was pale, she hadn't slept since the fire. You shouldn't read that, she said softly. I need to know what this is, Grayson replied. If we're going to stop it, we need to understand it. Patience stepped closer. You don't stop something born in blood. You survive it, if it lets you. Grayson looked up. You've seen this before, haven't you? She hesitated. When I was a girl, my mother used to whisper about the bay's mark. The ones who carried it always ended the same, taken by the water. Sometimes the curse passes through blood, sometimes through guilt. Her eyes met his. You ever wonder why the water never took you, Mr. Grayson? He didn't answer. Because he had. Every night since. That evening, a storm rolled in. Wind rattled the shutters, and the sky turned the color of bruised metal. Thomas tried to lighten the mood. We'll head inland at dawn. Maybe find a train west. But even as he spoke, the floorboards creaked, slow, deliberate steps from the hall. Friedrich froze. Did anyone else hear? The door to the study slammed shut. Grayson leapt to his feet, grabbing a lantern. The others followed as he pushed the door open. The room was empty. The fire had gone out, though no one had touched it. On the table, the ledger lay open again. But the ink had changed. New words had appeared across the page, forming as they watched. The debt must be balanced. Then, beneath it, a name appeared, Thomas Rutherford. Thomas stepped back, shaking his head. What kind of trick? Before he could finish, a sound echoed from outside, the distant clatter of chains. They ran to the window. The storm howled, rain slashing the glass. But through the flashes of lightning, shapes were moving along the tree line, figures half hidden in the rain. Get to the cellar, Grayson shouted. They grabbed the baby and fled down the stairs, the wind howling like a living thing. Below, the cellar smelled of damp earth and rot. Thomas barred the door. What are those things? Patience held Hope close. The ones marked in that book. They're coming for them. Thomas turned, fear flashing into anger. Then burn the damn book. He snatched the ledger from Grayson's hands and threw it into the fire pit. The flames hissed, and died instantly, leaving only cold smoke. The ledger sat untouched, the leather gleaming wet as if from the sea. Then the cellar door above them rattled. Bang, 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 each strike echoed through the walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. Thomas aimed his rifle at the stairs. Stay back. A hand burst through the door, pale, waterlogged, the fingers bound in iron rings. Another hand followed, then a face, its eyes black as tar, its mouth whispering bubbles. Patience screamed. Thomas fired, the gunshot deafening. The figure fell back, but when Grayson rushed forward, the door was wide open. No body, no blood, only wet footprints leading away into the storm. They fled the cellar, desperate. The farmhouse groaned as the wind rose to a shriek. Windows shattered, shutters ripped free. In the flashes of lightning, Grayson saw movement, shadows flickering through the rooms, whispering voices crawling up the walls. He stumbled into the parlor, and froze. Wexler stood by the window. Or what was left of him. His skin hung in ribbons, his coat soaked through. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were alive. Grayson, he said, voice bubbling with water. You shouldn't have opened the ledger. Grayson raised his pistol. You're dead. Wexler smiled. No, I'm paid for. Lightning flared again, and in that instant, Wexler vanished, leaving only the ledger, open on the floor. This time, another name had been written. E. Grayson. Patience found him staring at it. It's marked you now, she whispered. He nodded numbly. Then it wants me next. Thomas staggered in, bleeding from a cut on his head. The horses are gone. Doors won't open. It's like the house is holding us. Grayson looked around. The walls seemed to pulse, damp spreading like veins. He touched the wood. It was cold, slick, breathing. The curse isn't outside, he said. It's here. The ledger brought it in. Suddenly, the baby began to cry. Patience clutched her tighter, but the sound wasn't human anymore. It twisted, echoing through the room, until the walls trembled. The fire flared blue. The ledger's pages flipped wildly on their own. Then, with a single gust, the flames went out, and the name on the last page changed again. Hope Hollowcrest. Patience gasped. No. Grayson grabbed the book, desperate. What does it want? The ink bled, letters forming one by one. The blood must return to its source. Before anyone could react, the front door blew open with a crash. Wind and rain howled in, carrying the smell of salt and decay. And from the darkness beyond the threshold came a chorus of voices, hundreds, whispering in unison. Come home. Thomas fired wildly into the dark. Friedrich fell to his knees, praying in German. Grayson shoved Patience toward the back hall. Go, get her out through the barn. But what about you? She cried. I'm ending this. He turned back toward the ledger, now pulsing with dim blue light. He could feel it calling him, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Grayson, Thomas shouted, but before he could reach him, the floor split open. Water poured up through the cracks, cold, black, endless. Grayson fell to his knees, clutching the ledger as the water rose around him. He looked up at Patience, standing in the doorway, the baby in her arms. Run, he whispered. The last thing he saw before the current dragged him under was Patience screaming his name, then everything went dark. When the storm cleared at dawn, the farmhouse was gone. Only the chimney remained, standing in a pool of seawater miles from the bay. The ledger floated nearby, dry as bone. On its last page, 3 words had been added overnight. 1 debt paid. To be continued in Part 8, The Hollowcrest Inheritance. Call to action. If this story gave you chills, hit like, share, and subscribe for Part 8 of The Hollowcrest Scandal. Comment below, what do you think? The Blood Ledger really is a curse or a contract? Title: The Hollowcrest Scandal, Part 8, The Inheritance of Shadows. Historic horror series, simple cinematic storytelling for American YouTube audience, 1,000 words. When the storm cleared, the farmhouse was gone. But something had survived. A baby's cry echoed from the ruins. And with it, the curse of Hollowcrest was born again. Dawn broke cold and gray over the wreckage. The storm had flattened the land, tearing trees from their roots and washing away every sign of the farmhouse, except the chimney and the ledger. Patience lay face down in the mud, clutching the baby to her chest. She coughed up water, shivering, her mind a blur of lightning and screams. When she looked up, she saw Thomas dragging himself from the reeds, his face pale, his arm twisted at an impossible angle. Grayson, he rasped. Patience looked toward the flooded hollow where the farmhouse had been. The water was calm now, black as glass. He's gone. Thomas pushed himself up, trembling. Then it's over. But Patience shook her head. It never ends. Not with Hollowcrest blood still breathing. She looked down at baby Hope. The child was quiet, wide-eyed, staring into the distance as if she could see something the others couldn't. By noon, they reached a nearby village, Flatlands, a quiet farming community on the outskirts of Brooklyn. A kind widow named Mrs. Calloway took them in, fed them warm bread, and let them dry their clothes by the fire. She was a big woman with a gentle voice, but her eyes widened when she saw the baby. What's her name, dear? Patience hesitated. Hope. Mrs. Calloway froze. Hope, Hollowcrest. Patience's stomach dropped. How do you know that name? The widow crossed herself. Child, everyone around here knows it. Hollowcrest's old estate stood by the bay, years before the war. They said the family trafficked in more than slaves, trafficked in souls. The house burned in 24. Folks say the bay claimed it back. She lowered her voice. And every few decades, someone finds the name again, on a deed, a letter, a birth certificate. And bad things follow. Patience felt her blood run cold. That night, while Thomas slept, she examined the ledger again. Somehow it had followed them, lying by her bedside when she woke from a nightmare. The pages had changed once more. There were new entries now. Patience Crane, survived. Hope Hollowcrest, claimed. Awaiting collection. Patience shut the book with trembling hands. No, she whispered. You can't have her. A faint whisper answered, slithering through the room. The debt is blood. The blood must return. She turned, heart pounding. The cradle was rocking on its own. At dawn, she packed their few belongings. We're leaving, she told Thomas. Leaving where? The army's disbanding. The city's crawling with bounty hunters. We've got no money. Then we find work. We keep moving, as far inland as possible. He frowned. You think you can outrun that thing? Patience looked at the horizon. No, but maybe I can hide her from it. They traveled for weeks, through the Hudson Valley, then west toward Pennsylvania. The world was rebuilding after the war, and chaos made it easy to disappear. Patience worked as a washerwoman, then as a maid. Hope grew fast, too fast. By the time she was 5, she could read, sing, and sometimes finish sentences Patience hadn't spoken yet. "Who told you that?" Patience would ask. "The man by the river," Hope would say calmly. "He says my name isn't really Hope." In 1870, they settled in a small town called Millbridge. The people were kind, the church quiet, and for the first time, Patience thought they might be safe. But one summer night, Hope woke screaming. Patience rushed to her room. The child sat upright, pointing to the window. "Mama, they're calling." "Who's calling, baby?" "The people in the water." Patience's heart seized. Outside, the creek glimmered faintly under the moonlight, though there hadn't been rain for weeks. She went to the window. A figure stood across the water, watching them. Too still to be alive. Too real to be imagination. She pulled the curtains shut and held Hope tight until dawn. By now, Thomas had become a hollow shell of a man. He worked at the rail yard, drank too much, and rarely spoke. But he still carried the old musket from the war, and every night he checked it twice. When Patience told him about the figure, he didn't doubt her. "It's not finished with us," he muttered. "It wants all the names in that book gone." He went to fetch the ledger from the trunk. But when he opened it, he froze. There were no names left. Only one word written across every page, in thick black ink. Return. The next evening, the town gathered for Sunday service. The sky was heavy and strange, the air thick with salt. Halfway through the sermon, a tremor ran through the floorboards. Lamps flickered. Then came the sound, like waves crashing far away. But Millbridge was 100 miles from the ocean. Patience looked toward the church doors. Water was seeping under the cracks. "Flood!" someone shouted. Panic broke out. People rushed for the exits, but when they pushed the doors open, a wall of dark water waited outside, rising up the hill, swallowing everything in its path. Thomas grabbed Hope. "Run!" But the water was faster. It burst through the windows, cold and black, sweeping pews aside. Screams filled the air. Patience fought her way toward the pulpit, clutching the child. "Hold on to me, baby." The church bell tolled once, twice, then the steeple cracked. Lightning flashed, and through the surge, Patience saw them again. Figures, half-formed, half-drowned, the souls of Hollowcrest slaves. Wexler among them, Grayson beside him, face gray and hollow-eyed. "Patience," he called, his voice echoing through water. "It won't stop with you. Take her inland. Burn the book." Then the current pulled him away, vanishing in the swirl. When Patience awoke, she was lying in mud beside the ruins of the church. The water was gone, as if it had never been. Bodies lay scattered across the field. Hope was missing. She stumbled through the wreckage, screaming her name. Then she saw footprints, small, bare footprints, leading toward the woods. At the edge of the trees, the child stood waiting. Her dress was dry, her eyes, pale as moonlight. "Mama," she said calmly, "the water didn't want me. It listens to me." Patience fell to her knees. "What are you saying?" Hope smiled faintly. "It remembers me. From before I was born." The wind carried the faint sound of waves, though there was no sea for miles. And from far away, a whisper answered her words. "The blood has found its heir." That night, as the moon rose, Patience buried the ledger in a hollow tree and fled north, carrying nothing but a single prayer. But in the darkness, miles behind her, the tree's roots began to drip black water, seeping through the soil, spelling out 3 words in the mud. The Hollowcrest Inheritance. To be continued in Part 9, The Return to Wallabout Bay. Call to action. If this chapter haunted you, don't miss Part 9 of the Hollowcrest Scandal. Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the curse alive. Comment below, do you think Hope is human, or something far older? Title: The Hollowcrest Scandal, Part 9, The Return to Wallabout Bay. Historic Horror Series, Part 9 of 10, easy, cinematic, and chilling for American YouTube audience. 1,000 words. Some places never die. The Bay remembers. The dead remember. And when the tide turns red, it means Hollowcrest has come home. The year was 1878. 8 years had passed since the flood at Millbridge, the night the river rose like the ocean and took nearly half the town. Patience Crane had lived in hiding ever since, drifting from village to village under false names. But she could never run far enough. Wherever she went, people whispered of strange tides, wells turning brackish, and children hearing songs in their dreams. Always after Hope's 6th birthday. Now, Hope was 13. Tall, quiet, unnaturally calm. Her eyes no longer the soft brown of childhood but a cool, glassy gray, like sea fog before a storm. They lived on the outskirts of Brooklyn again, in a crumbling boarding house once owned by a retired sea captain. Patience worked as a laundress. Hope rarely went outside, but every morning before dawn, Patience would find her standing at the window, staring toward the east, toward the faint glimmer of Wallabout Bay. One evening, Patience returned from work to find Hope sitting at the kitchen table with a folded piece of paper before her. "Where did you get that?" Hope didn't look up. It came in the wind. Patience unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sentence, written in elegant script. "The bay waits for its own." No signature, no address, just a faint watermark of a ship's seal, an emblem she recognized from long ago. The same seal that had been stamped on the Hollowcrest ledger. That night, Patience dreamed of the farmhouse again. Only this time, it stood rebuilt, glowing faintly under the moon. The porch light burned though no one stood there. She heard singing, soft, childlike voices rising from the marsh. Then she saw Ruth, the little girl who'd vanished so many years ago, standing ankle-deep in water, smiling through gray lips. "Miss Patience," she whispered. "It's time to come home." Patience woke. With a start, the sound of water dripping filled the room, though the roof didn't leak. Hope's bed was empty. The window was open, curtains blowing like sails. She ran through the night, following footprints down the dirt path toward the shore. The air smelled of salt and decay. Wallabout Bay lay before her, calm as glass beneath a ghostly moon. But out in the distance, where the tide met the ruins of the old rope factory, she saw movement, shadows wading through the shallows. And there, at the water's edge, stood Hope. The wind whipped her hair as she turned to face her mother. "I have to go," she said softly. "They're calling me back." Patience's voice broke. "Baby, please, don't listen to them." Hope tilted her head, eyes shining silver. "You don't understand. I am them." The water behind her began to ripple. Hands broke the surface, hundreds of them, pale and rotted, reaching up like weeds in a drowned field. Faces followed. Ruth, Caleb, Naomi, Grayson, all the lost souls from the camp. They stood half submerged, whispering in a single voice that carried over the water. "Return the blood. Restore the debt." Patience fell to her knees. "Take me instead. She's just a child." But Hope shook her head. "You already gave them your life. I'm what they made." She reached out her hand. "Come with me, Mama. We can end it together." Patience stared into those gray eyes, and for the first time, she saw what lay behind them. Memories that weren't Hope's. Images of the breeding pens at Pritchard's Landing, the ledgers, the men in fine coats who signed contracts over human lives. And deeper still, she saw Hollowcrest himself, the ghost of a man who had turned bloodlines into profit, his curse echoing through generations. Hope's voice was layered now, half hers, half something ancient. "He used us to make more than bodies, Mama. He made vessels. And now they want them back." Patience stumbled backward. "No, no, you're not him. You're mine." For a brief moment, Hope's human voice returned, trembling. "Then save me, before I forget how to be your daughter." Patience made her choice. She lunged forward, grabbing Hope's wrist. The touch burned cold as ice, but she didn't let go. "If they want you, they'll have to take me too." The water roared. The hands surged upward, wrapping around them both. Patience screamed, but then the scream became a hymn, the same old Gola song Patience's people had sung on the riverbanks long ago. A song of freedom and defiance. The waves hesitated. Hope's eyes widened. "They're listening." Patience sang louder. "We ain't property. We ain't yours to claim." The dead voices faltered, their harmony breaking apart. The hands began to loosen. "Go," Patience whispered. "Run inland. Don't look back." Hope shook her head, tears streaking her face. "I won't leave you. Promise me." Patience shouted as the tide rose around her. Finally, Hope turned and fled. Patience disappeared beneath the churning water. The next morning, fishermen found her body washed up on the rocks. But there was no sign of the girl. Only a small leather-bound ledger lying beside the corpse, its pages dry despite the sea. Inside, one last entry had appeared in delicate handwriting. Patience Crane, freed. Hope Hollowcrest, ascended. Below it, a single drop of saltwater had dried into the shape of a teardrop. Hope was never seen in Brooklyn again. But over the years, sailors began reporting strange happenings near Wallabout Bay. On certain foggy nights, when the tide was low, they claimed to see a young woman walking on the water, her bare feet leaving no ripples, her hair streaming like seaweed. She would lift her hand toward passing ships, and when she did, the winds would shift. Storms would scatter, and, sometimes, in the distance, you could hear a faint lullaby, the old Gola song of the Pritchard slaves, rising over the waves. Those who heard it said they dreamed of a woman with eyes like smoke whispering, "Tell them I'm still watching." The debt is paid. Years later, a letter arrived at the Freedmen's Bureau archives in Washington. No return address. No explanation. Inside was a single document, a reproduction of the Hollowcrest ledger. Every name had been crossed out except one. Hope Crane, keeper of the bay. Even today, locals say the water around Wallabout Bay never freezes, not even in the coldest winters. And if you walk along the shore at midnight, you might see her reflection before you see your own. Some say she protects the lost souls still searching for home. Others whisper that she's guarding something far older, waiting for the day when the bloodline dares to rise again. Either way, the Hollowcrest curse never really left Brooklyn. It just changed its name. To be continued in Part 10, The Last Tide. Call to action. If this haunted your heart, don't miss Part 10, the final chapter of the Hollowcrest Scandal. Like, share, and subscribe to keep the story alive. Comment below, do you think Hope saved the souls, or became their queen? Title: The Hollowcrest Scandal, Part 10, The Last Tide. Historic horror series. Final part, cinematic and chilling for American audience, 1,000 words. The water remembers every sin. But some sins refuse to drown. When the last tide comes in, the Hollowcrest name will finally die, or rise again. Brooklyn, 1896. Nearly 2 decades had passed since the night the bay swallowed Patience Crane. The city had changed. Electric lights, new bridges, smokestacks rising where swamps once lay, but the curse of Hollowcrest still clung to the water. People spoke of it in whispers. A shipyard worker lost to the tide. A fisherman whose nets came up full of bones. And the strangest tale of all, a young woman who walked the shoreline, never aging, her gray eyes glowing like the moon. Some called her the Bay Widow. Others called her the Keeper. Only one man claimed to know her name. His name was Jonathan Pritchard, grandson of the original Hollowcrest overseer. Educated in London, proud of his lineage, he'd returned to America determined to reclaim the family's lost estate. He bought up what remained of Millbridge and built a mansion on the bluffs overlooking the water, a house of marble and iron called the Resurgence. Locals said it was cursed before the first stone was laid. One autumn night, as the fog rolled in, Jonathan stood in his study gazing out over the bay. The water gleamed silver, unnaturally still. In his hand, he held a letter written in a child's hand. You cannot own what was never yours to keep. No signature. Only a wax seal of a teardrop. He smiled thinly. So, the witch still remembers. On his desk lay the original Hollowcrest ledger, rescued, he claimed, from the ruins of the flood. Every page was marked with the same strange ink, red as dried blood. At the very end, where the name Hope Crane had once been written, he had scrawled a single word. Reclaim. That night, thunder rumbled over Brooklyn. Jonathan descended to the cellar, where workers had unearthed an ancient stone cistern, a remnant, perhaps, of the old rope factory. The air smelled of salt and rot. The walls wept moisture as if the sea itself pressed against them. He carried the ledger to the edge of the cistern and began to chant the old Hollowcrest creed. Through flesh, we rise. Through blood, we bind. Through name, we reign eternal. The water began to tremble. Then came the whisper. Soft, melodic, and cold as death. Jonathan Hollowcrest Pritchard, did you think I'd forgotten you? He spun around. Hope stood in the shadows, barefoot, her dress soaked, her hair trailing like riverweed. She looked no older than she had in 1878. "You shouldn't be here," he stammered. "You're dead." Her lips curved. "So are you. You just haven't realized it yet." He raised the ledger. "This book holds every name that built your bloodline. You're bound to it. I command you, obey." Hope's expression hardened. "That book was written with stolen ink, ink made from my people's pain. But tonight, it ends." The walls began to groan. The water in the cistern surged upward, swirling into a vortex. Jonathan shouted over the roar, "You can't destroy legacy." Hope stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Legacy built on suffering is only rot wearing a crown." With a motion of her hand, the ledger burst into flames, not red, but blue, cold and pure as moonlight. The room shook violently. Cracks spread across the ceiling. Water poured in through the fissures. Jonathan backed away, gasping. "You'll drown us both." Hope's voice was calm, echoing like waves. "You drowned them first." Behind her, ghostly shapes rose from the water, men, women, and children of the old Hollowcrest fields. Their eyes glowed like lanterns beneath the surface. They began to sing, the same river hymn Patience had sung as she sank beneath the tide. No chains below, no masters above. The tide remembers, but the tide forgives. Jonathan fell to his knees. "Please, I only wanted to restore the family's honor." Hope's gaze softened, just slightly. "Then be part of its ending." She reached out her hand. For a moment, he took it. And in that instant, the sea claimed him. The floor collapsed, and the waters of Wallabout Bay surged through the foundation, devouring the mansion, the ledger, and every trace of the Hollowcrest name. When the storm cleared, the resurgence was gone. All that remained was a single marble step, half buried in the sand, inscribed with 2 words. Debt paid. 3 months later, a small chapel stood near the bay, built by freedmen who tended the graves of those lost in the flood. An old woman named Sister Abigail claimed she saw a girl standing at the water's edge each dawn, humming softly. "She ain't ghost nor saint," Abigail told anyone who'd listen. "She's the keeper, makes sure the dead rest easy, and that no Pritchard ever rises again." Sometimes, when the wind blew right, people swore they could hear 2 voices instead of 1. A mother and daughter, Patience and Hope, singing to each other through the mist. 1900s, decades later. The bay was dredged for naval construction. Workers uncovered old bricks, chains, and human bones. Among them lay a small iron pendant shaped like a teardrop. The foreman who found it said it burned his hand until he dropped it back into the water. That night, he dreamed of a woman with gray eyes standing in the tide. She whispered, "Let it rest." He quit the next day. Modern day, tourists walk the Brooklyn waterfront now, snapping photos, sipping coffee, never knowing what sleeps beneath their feet. But when the fog rolls in off the East River and the waves lap just right, the air still carries that faint, haunting melody, slow, sad, and resolute. If you follow it long enough, you might see her. A woman in a weathered gray dress, walking the tide line, her reflection shimmering beside yours. She looks peaceful, almost human, until she turns her face toward you. And her eyes are the color of the deep. Then the wind whispers through the reeds. The Hollowcrest debt is paid. But the bay keeps its secrets. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the last line of that old hymn. The same one passed down through generations of those who survived. We rise with the tide. And fall with none. Our chains are broken. Our watch begun. Epilogue. The Hollowcrest name faded from every record. The mansion, the ledger, the plantations, all lost to time. But hope remained, not as a ghost, but as a guardian of the waters that once drowned her bloodline. A reminder that history cannot be buried, only transformed. And when the tide turns red again, some say it means she's watching, ensuring no one ever dares build their fortune upon suffering again. Because justice, like the sea, always returns. The end. The Hollowcrest Scandal. Complete historic horror saga. Loudspeaker call to action. If the Hollowcrest Scandal moved you, don't let the story sink. Right finger like, share, and subscribe to keep haunted history alive. Speech balloon comment below. Do you believe Hope truly found peace, or does she still walk the shore, guarding the bay?